Ever wonder if fidgeting helps you remember things? Or if a really sad story sticks with you more than a happy one?
Right.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really digging into how we remember stories, narrative recall. Specifically, how things like, moving your hands, the emotions in the story, and even just your own individual traits play a part.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, you, the learner, you brought us two really interesting recent studies. They look at just how gesturing and emotions affect narrative recall when we read aloud.
Hmm.
So, the mission today, as we explore these studies you shared, is to get a handle on what helps or maybe what gets in the way when we try to remember a story.
Right.
And, one of the really surprising things we'll unpack is that being told to gesture while reading, it can actually make recall worse for a lot of people.
No kidding.
Yeah, especially if you're not someone who naturally gestures much. But on the flip side, we'll also see how the emotional punch of a story can, act like super glue for memory.
Right. Some real head scratchers in here. We're going to look at these maybe unexpected downsides of instructed gesturing, the power of emotion, and how your own verbal memory and your natural tendency to gesture all mix together.
It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, prepare for some potential aha moments because some of this might shift how you think about learning and remembering. Okay, let's start unpacking. First, this idea that our minds and bodies are, well, pretty connected. How do gestures fit in?
Well, the core idea, and it's pretty fundamental, is that understanding isn't just abstract. It's anchored in our senses, our physical experience.
Even for something like reading, which feels purely mental.
Exactly. There's this link. And these studies, they're specifically looking at producing gestures, your own hand movements as you read or speak, not watching someone else.
Okay, that's an important distinction
Uh-huh.
because you might think watching helps visualization, but this is about what we do. And the research background here is, well, it's been a bit mixed, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. People have looked at gestures for remembering directions or animated clips, learning verbs, and sometimes it helps, sometimes not so much. It seems like reading narratives aloud hasn't been looked at quite as closely.
So why would moving our hands even affect memory in the first place? What's the theory?
So, a key theory revolves around this idea of cognitive load. Think of it as mental effort.
Okay.
The thought is when we gesture, we're creating these visual spatial representations, little maps or actions in the air.
Hmm.
And doing that might make it easier for the brain to initially process the information. It sort of offloads some mental work onto the body.
Oh, like sketching something out quickly to grasp it better. Makes it more concrete.
Exactly. And by doing that, you might free up, mental resources, brain power for the
Yeah.
actual memory formation part.
Right, right. And isn't there some research supporting that, like kids explaining math?
Precisely. There was that study where kids gesturing while explaining math problems seemed to help them remember a separate list of words afterwards.
Huh.
The idea was the gesturing eased the load of the math explanation, leaving more short-term memory available for the words.
Interesting.
And there's also research on that tip of the tongue state, when you're grasping for a word.
Oh, yeah. Hate that feeling.
Well, sometimes gesturing can actually help retrieve the word, again, suggesting it plays a role in accessing information.
Okay, got it. So, with that background, let's dive into study one. They had people read positive, negative, and neutral stories aloud, right?
Yeah.
And some were told to gesture, others weren't.
That's the setup. And this is where it got, pretty counterintuitive.
What happened?
The big finding overall was that being instructed to gesture actually hindered recall. People remembered less of the stories when they were told to gesture.
Wait, what?
Less. And this was especially true for people who scored higher on tests of verbal memory.
Hold on. That seems totally backwards. You'd think people with better verbal memory would be better at integrating gestures or would benefit more. Why would it hurt them?
Well, one explanation the researchers offered is that for people who don't naturally gesture much, being told to do it is like an extra task. It demands conscious effort. And that extra effort might divide their attention. It pulls focus away from really digging into the story, understanding it, encoding it.
So if you're already good at making mental movies while you read, maybe.
Exactly. If you've got strong verbal memory, maybe you're already adept at creating rich internal representations. Being forced to add physical gestures might just be distracting noise, an unnecessary layer.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It's like giving an expert painter a paint-by-numbers kit. Just gets in the way. But what about people with, say, lower verbal memory scores? Did it hurt them too?
Interestingly, no. The study found that for those with lower verbal memory, the instruction to gesture didn't seem to have that same negative impact on recall.
Okay, why not?
The thinking there is maybe those individuals are already more accustomed to using gestures as part of how they process information and communicate.
Right.
So being asked to do it might not feel like such an extra burden. It might be more aligned with how they naturally operate anyway.
Okay, that paints a more nuanced picture. It's not just gestures good or gestures bad. It depends on who you are in your natural style. Let's switch gears then. Emotion. I mean, everyone knows emotional stuff sticks.
Absolutely. The emotion-enhanced memory effect is really well established. Things with an emotional charge, positive or negative, just tend to be remembered better than neutral stuff.
Why is that, fundamentally?
A big part of it is attention. Emotional information tends to capture our attention more effectively.
Like a spotlight.
Yeah, exactly. It makes those emotional details stand out, get encoded more strongly, while the boring, neutral bits kind of fade into the background.
And we see this with single words too, right? Remembering love or fear better than chair.
Definitely. Both positive and negative words often show better recall than neutral ones, but when you look at whole stories, the picture gets a bit more specific sometimes.
How so?
Some narrative recall studies find a particular pattern. Negative stories remembered best, then positive, then neutral.
Huh. That resonates. I can definitely recall sad book plots way better than just average ones. Why would negative have an edge over positive sometimes?
Well, one idea is the attention narrowing hypothesis. Negative things might trigger higher arousal, maybe a more intense focus.
Like a danger signal. Pay attention.
Sort of. That heightened focus on the negative details could lead to deeper processing, stronger memory traces.
Okay, so what did Study One find about emotion and story recall? Did it fit that negative, positive, neutral pattern?
It did, yes. When they looked at free recall, just asking people to remember what they could, negative stories came out on top, then positive, then neutral was recalled the least.
And for specific details?
For specific recall questions, neutral was definitely worse than both positive and negative. So yeah, the study strongly supports the idea that emotion boosts narrative memory.
Okay, so emotion memory boost, maybe with a slight edge for negative stuff in general recall. Cool. Now let's talk individual differences again. Verbal memory came up. Can you unpack that a bit more for us? The learner, what is it exactly?
Sure. Verbal memory is basically your ability to hold onto and work with spoken or written information. Words, sentences. It's a key part of what we call working memory.
The brain's scratch pad.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. Your mental workspace for holding and manipulating information for ongoing tasks, like understanding language or reasoning.
And it's strongly linked to understanding what you read.
Oh, absolutely. There's a ton of research showing a solid link between working memory capacity, especially the verbal part, and reading comprehension. Even for complex texts, people better at holding verbal info tend to understand better.
Okay, and Study One confirmed this. Better verbal memory meant better recall.
Yes, pretty clearly. Verbal memory was a positive predictor of free recall. So folks who scored higher on the verbal memory tests generally remembered more of the story content.
Seems logical. Better tools, better results. But then Study Two threw in another variable, our natural tendency to gesture. How did they even measure that?
Ah, this was clever. In the second study, they showed participants a cartoon, I think it was Donald Duck's Garden.
Hey, classic.
Yeah. And then they simply observed and coded how much people naturally gestured while retelling the cartoon's story. No instructions, just natural recall.
Okay, so they got a baseline gesture rate for each person. What did they find when they compared that to verbal memory? Are hand talkers also word smart, or?
Interestingly, no significant link. Study 2 found no real correlation between verbal memory scores and how much people naturally gestured.
Really? Because didn't they sort of expect maybe people with lower verbal memory might gesture more to compensate?
That was a hypothesis floating around, yeah. Some prior work hinted at that possibility, but in this context, reading and recalling narratives, they didn't find that connection. They seemed to be pretty independent traits.
Okay. But they did find something else interesting about natural gesturing, right?
They did. This was another surprising one. They found that a higher natural tendency to gesture was linked to better narrative recall.
Better. So the more you naturally move your hands when talking, the better you remembered the stories you read aloud.
That's what Study 2 suggested, yeah. It held for free recall, specific recall, and even for deeper comprehension questions about the narratives.
Wow. So for natural gesturers, it's like the movement is actually part of the thinking and remembering process itself, not a distraction at all.
It seems that way. Perhaps for those individuals, gesturing is so deeply integrated with language production and thought that it actually facilitates rather than hinders comprehension and recall.
Fascinating. And did study 2 shed any more light on why the instructed gesturing hurt people back in study 1? Especially those who don't gesture much naturally.
It did, yeah. They found a really telling interaction when looking at specific recall. Being instructed to gesture was clearly detrimental for people with low or even average natural gesture rates,
But not for the high gestures.
but not significantly for the high natural gesturers. It didn't seem to hurt them.
Ah, that really nails it down, doesn't it? If you force someone to gesture who doesn't normally, it messes with their recall. But if they do it naturally anyway, being told to do it doesn't really change things negatively.
Exactly. It strongly suggests that the naturalness factor is key. Does it feel integrated, or does it feel like an extra clunky task you have to consciously manage?
Okay, let's pull this all together. This is pretty complex but super interesting. The big shocker. Telling adults to gesture while reading a story aloud can actually backfire,
Right. Especially if you have good verbal memory or just not a natural hand talker.
which kind of flips the script on the simple gesturing reduces cognitive load idea, at least for this task.
It suggests it's more complicated than that. If gesturing feels unnatural, or if it pulls you away from your own internal mental imagery that reading sparks, it might increase load, not decrease it.
So the type of task really matters. Learning directions might be different from absorbing a narrative.
Seems likely, yes. And then there's a clear win for emotion. Emotional content consistently helps memory stick.
Definitely a takeaway there. Finding emotional hooks in learning material could be really powerful.
And while good verbal memory is generally a plus, how instructed gesture affects you seems tied to your natural gesturing style.
Right, so the practical advice might be, if you're a natural gesturer, gesturing while learning is probably fine, maybe even helpful.
Could be.
But if it feels forced, maybe don't. It might actually be counterproductive.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. Be mindful of what feels natural versus what feels like an effortful add-on.
And we should probably note, these findings on instructed gesture, they might need more research, right? They might not apply everywhere.
Absolutely. The researchers themselves mentioned this might not apply to, say, a parent reading to a child. That's a very different dynamic interaction, shared attention, different goals.
Yeah, context is key. Reading to remember for yourself is different than engaging a child. Okay, so key takeaways for you, the learner, from this deep dive.
Okay, first, leverage emotion. Emotional content in what you're learning. Big memory booster. Seek it out or create those connections.
Second, be cautious about forcing gestures while reading to remember. If it feels unnatural, it might hurt more than it helps. Pay attention to your natural style.
Third, know thyself. Your natural tendency to gesture might interact with instructions or conscious efforts. If you gesture a lot naturally, it might be fine or good. If not, forcing it could backfire.
And finally, good verbal memory is definitely helpful for learning from text. Worth strengthening those skills.
Definitely. So here's a final thought to chew on. Considering all this, how might you adapt your own learning strategies? When you're tackling different kinds of reading, could paying more attention to the emotional pulse of the text, or just being more aware of your own natural movement or stillness while you process it, be a key to unlocking better understanding and retention?
Something to really think about. How does your own body play into how your mind learns? Fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you keep exploring these ideas and see how they resonate with your own learning.